Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. And so with that said, let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, let me just say this. There are times where I sign on to do this show where, you start to wonder, what am I going to talk about here for 30, 40, 50 minutes, that I do this show 3-4 times a week? Well, today ain't one of those days. We are not scraping the bottom of the barrel on today's Aaron Torres Sports Podcast as, oh my goodness, the previous 24 hours from when I'm recording right now are some of the craziest in recent college football history with this wild Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher back and forth. And you guys all know everything that happened, but let me just give me 2 minutes to just explain everything that happened, and then we'll get into the meat of it, because I'll tell you this. It is not often that I think Nick Saban takes public L's, but I thought this was a really bad day for Nick Saban, and I didn't like how he handled himself. I know he has since apologized and run some stuff back and said he didn't mean to single anybody out, but I just do not think this was a good 24 hours for Nick Saban. But really the crux of it is something that we've talked about quite a bit on this show over the last, 2 to 3 months, and that is the 2022 high school recruiting class at Texas A&M. You probably, if you're listening to this show, don't need me to tell you, but it was the greatest recruiting class in the history of high school football, or certainly since the recruiting rankings came into place. In total, Texas A&M signed 8 5-star players. They signed something in the neighborhood of 14 to 15 of the top 100 players in high school football, which is essentially unheard of, although Alabama had slightly 1 or 2 less. But this was a historically great class. And in the lead up to signing day on February, where they added a few more 5-stars from the early signing period, there became this rumor and innuendo that Texas A&M was paying all of its players in its recruiting class, calling it NIL, but was essentially pay for play. The rumor at the time, and it was never reported by anybody credible, not ESPN, not The Athletic, not Fox Sports, not New York Times, whoever you deemed to be credible. Nobody credible reported it, but it was out there that A&M was paying upwards of $1 million per player to sign this great class and calling it NIL. Jimbo Fisher at the time responded to it. He wasn't very happy, defended his program, all that good stuff. Why do I bring it up? Why are we talking about it on a Friday in May? Well, you know why. It is because on Wednesday night, Nick Saban was doing a booster event for Alabama fans, and I think everybody knows, but this time of year, it's a lot of booster events. You kind of travel around the state, travel locally, meet with fans, meet with boosters, tell them about the season, get them fired up. If you remember, ironically, this time last year was when Jimbo Fisher made the famous statement of, "We're beating Alabama at some point before I get out of here as the Texas A&M head coach." So Nick Saban is at one of these events on Wednesday night, and he's on this panel with Nate Oates and some other people from across the Alabama athletic department, and he's kind of asked about the whole situation in the world of college sports. And this is what Nick Saban said to Alabama boosters. This is what he said. He said, "We were second in recruiting last year. A&M was first. A&M bought every player on their team, made a deal for name, image, likeness. We didn't buy one player, but I don't know if we are going to be able to sustain that in the future because more and more people are doing it." When I saw this quote, okay, that's like the record scratch. We got to stop for half a second, because when I saw this quote on Wednesday night, I thought for certain that could not be accurate. I thought for certain Nick Saban was misquoted, and I thought for certain, I even put out a tweet that is still on my Twitter feed. I said, I bet we get some sort of retraction from Nick Saban by 11 a.m. Central on Thursday. Because I don't believe he would say that. Not that people aren't paying players through NIL, not that NIL's out of control, but for Nick Saban to publicly call out Texas A&M with no actual proof, I just did not believe that could actually happen. Well, fast forward about 10 minutes later, and somebody tweets at me, Oh, you think there's a retraction coming? You think Nick Saban is going to claim on Thursday that he was misquoted? Oh, well, here's the thing. It's 2022, and we have video, and the video went crazy viral. It became certainly the biggest story in all of sports. It became so big TMZ was covering it. That's how big it was. Where there is video, like I said, Nick Saban with Nate Oates on a panel, and Nick Saban said this exact thing. And so my mind was blown, and of course the natural inclination is, what's next? What is going to happen, and how is Jimbo Fisher going to respond? Because he's obviously not going to take it sitting down lightly. Now, I also thought, I should say, you talk about where Aaron was wrong. I thought that maybe we'd get a public statement from Jimbo Fisher. I thought that he wasn't going to really get into the weeds on this because, one, Jimbo Fisher already talked about this and answered this on National Signing Day. And he said, look, this is ridiculous. We're not talking about this anymore. But two, I was under the impression he had a good relationship with Nick Saban. Used to work for him, all that good stuff. We all know that. Well, no. Jimbo Fisher was not taking this sitting down. Jimbo Fisher was not releasing a press release or making a non-comment on it. Oh, Jimbo Fisher held his own press conference on Thursday morning and came out guns blazing. I am going to read you a few of the quotes, although not all of them, because I have never seen a press conference like this. Here is what Jimbo Fisher had to say about the allegation from Nick Saban that every player in the recruiting class was bought. First, he starts off kind of calm. We've never bought anybody, Jimbo Fisher said. No rules are broken. Nothing was done wrong. It's a shame that you've got to sit here and defend 17-year-olds and families in Texas A&M. Because we do things right, we're always going to do things right, we're always going to be here, we're doing a heck of a job. Okay, that's not a big deal. Totally calm, perfectly rational thing for a coach to say when something like this happens. But then he continued. It's pretty despicable that a reputable head coach can come out and say this when he doesn't get his way. The narcissist in him doesn't allow those things to happen. It's ridiculous when he's not on top. So Jimbo Fisher just called Nick Saban a narcissist and basically claims that because Alabama did not have the number one recruiting class, he is freaking out. And if that's where it ended, okay, that'd be one. Oh, but no, it didn't even come close to ending there. Here is what he said from there. He said, some people think they're God. This is Jimbo Fisher talking about Nick Saban. Some people think they're God. Well, go dig into how God did his deal. You may find out a lot of things you don't want to know. We build him up to be the czar of football. Go dig into his past or anybody's that's ever coached for him. You can find out anything you want to find out, what he does and how he does it. So Nick Saban, you just opened up a can of worms, my man. You just accused Jimbo Fisher of a lot of things, and he's got some skeletons in the closet. And then finally a couple other things. First of all, he's asked something by my buddy Olin Buchanan, and he says, Nick Saban, he's the greatest ever. When you've got all the advantages, it's easy. And then he continued, remember, Jimbo Fisher was the longtime assistant coach of Bobby Bowden that took over the program when Bobby Bowden retired. Jimbo Fisher says, you coach with people like Bobby Bowden and learn how to do things. You coach with other people and learn how not to do things. There's a reason there's a reason I haven't gone back and worked for Saban, don't want to be associated with him. And he was also asked if Nick Saban had reached out, and he said, not going to, or if they had talked, not going to, were done. In other words, Nick Saban tried to reach out. Jimbo Fisher did not pick up his call, did not respond, and oh, baby, was he fired up. And so, of course, by the way, Thursday afternoon, Nick Saban ran back some of the comments. He meant to say that he didn't mean to single anybody out. He's frustrated with the current state, blah, blah, blah. We'll get into that in a minute. But before we do, we got to talk about the initial front back Saban to Fisher, because I have never seen anything like it. And let me also say this. I don't ever remember a scenario where I can't ever remember Nick Saban being this wrong about something. First of all, to go back to the initial allegation, I think at this point, it's just me and Jimbo Fisher that remain like bizarrely stunned by how big this story is and how it seemingly came out of nowhere. I've talked about it on the show before, and I just talked about it a minute ago. this allegation that Texas A&M, and I understand it's a new world. I understand two things have happened in the last 12 months that could make this story spicy and juicy. NIL was put into place, and on top of that, Texas A&M signed the #1 recruiting class ever. I can understand where a fan, where you, where me, if I'm a Tennessee fan, if I'm a Georgia fan, if I'm a Texas fan, can sit there and say, well, wait a second now. They never recruited like this before. Then NIL comes into place. But first of all, Nick Saban publicly in front, I don't care if it's his own boosters, but to publicly accuse Jimbo Fisher, here is my fundamental issue. My fundamental issue is there is no credible report. No one credible has ever definitively said, here is the proof that Texas A&M offered every single one of their recruits $1 million. I've said it before. The initial report started on an Oklahoma message board, if I understand correct, which was then picked up by BroBible.com. BroBible.com. And from there, it took off like wildfire. We're not talking about The Athletic breaking this story. We're not talking about Bruce Feldman breaking this story. We're not talking about ESPN breaking this story. We're talking about an internet message board story that got picked up by BroBible.com that has taken off like wildfire, and now Nick Saban is talking about it publicly. It's insane. Secondly, let me just say this, and I've said it a million times, so A&M fans have probably heard this 3-4 times. Diehard listeners of this show have, but let me reiterate. I'm not saying that NIL played no role in A&M's 2022 recruiting class because I believe NIL plays a role in every recruiting conversation in these days. But as I said a minute ago, there are also perfectly logical reasons why this A&M class came together the way that it did, and I've already talked about them. We don't need to get into all of it. Houston had a historically great recruiting class, or a historically great high school class. Texas A&M always recruits Houston well. They had more great players than usual. Texas A&M took very much advantage of the coaching craziness across college football. They had a 5-star defensive tackle that was committed to Oklahoma, ends up leaving Oklahoma when Lincoln Riley leaves for USC. They had a 4-star safety that was leaning towards LSU, was going to go to LSU. Then Coach O gets fired. He ends up at A&M. Shamar Stewart, 5-star from Miami, was leaning towards Florida and Miami. They both changed coaches. He ends up at Texas A&M. And then in an interesting twist, by the way, especially in the post-John Ruiz era, he literally said at his press conference, if it was about money, I would have gone to Miami. I would have stayed home. So take that for what it's worth since we're just taking rumors and innuendo. Those are the reasons. Beyond that, remember, Texas A&M was coming off a 2020 season in which they went 9-1 and finished 5th in the country. Most of these kids committed before the season even started, or at least a fair number of them committed before the season started. Let's also remember that they beat Alabama, that many of these recruits were on campus when they beat Alabama, and they basically got the best version of Texas A&M that you could possibly get in that scenario. So one, we have no credible reports. Two, there are legitimate reasons why this class came together the way that it did, and I'm not saying NIL played no role, but to say that it was the reason with no credible proof is bad. But here is where my frustration personally with Nick Saban comes in, and I think the frustration of 13 other SEC fan bases comes in. Nick Saban's being a total hypocrite here. For him to go on a podium, and again, I get that he's in front of his own boosters. I get that, one, he's trying to scare them into donating more money. I get all that. But at the same time, this is a totally hypocritical BS move, okay? And I'll tell you why. Because even if Texas A&M did what he accused them of, which we, again, have zero tangible proof of, here's the bottom line. It's not as though Nick Saban has not bragged about Alabama's own NIL enterprise before. Remember, July 1st, 2021, NIL comes into law by NCAA bylaw. Okay, so every state has different laws, which we've talked about and which we'll actually talk about again here in a minute. But July 1, NIL is allowed. Players can get paid for their name, image, and likeness, okay? Where was Nick Saban about 2.5, 3 weeks later? Oh, I remember, and some of you don't, or some of you are being blissfully ignorant, but he was at a Texas high school coaches convention about July 20th, July 21st, right in the lead up to SEC Media Days. And do you remember what he said at the Texas coaches convention in mid-July of 2021, right after NIL? Oh, I remember. He said, well, it's the strangest thing. It's crazy. Our quarterback, who's never started a game, this was Bryce Young last year, before Bryce Young had ever started a game in Alabama. Oh, our quarterback, that guy's made right around 7 figures, and he's never even started a game. It's the craziest thing. And at the time, we all looked at it like, 1, that's crazy. He never started a game. But 2, that was Nick Saban using NIL in his own right as a recruiting tool. And I know what Alabama fans will say, well, it's different because he was already on campus. It's different than A&M paying players, which, by the way, we don't have proof that A&M has done. But is it really different, though? By technicality, it's kind of sort of different because he was on campus. But if NIL is really about your name, image, and likeness, what had Bryce Young done to that point to earn $1 million or so, give or take, from Nick Saban's mouth? Absolutely nothing. And so you can't, out of one side of your mouth, brag about how great NIL is to all the high school coaches in the state of Texas and tell them it's incredible. You come here, it's the darndest thing. My guy hasn't even started a game. He's making $1 million. And then complain because you believe that Texas A&M or anybody has a perceived advantage in recruiting. I would also mention, this was some of the stuff that Jimbo Fisher talked about. I'm not into the game of rumors and innuendo. I'll defend Jimbo Fisher until we get a report from The Athletic, from the New York Times, from wherever that has proof that all these guys got $1 million. And if it does, then I'll come back and apologize to Nick Saban. But at the same time, it's not as though, as Jimbo Fisher said, Nick Saban doesn't have a few skeletons in his closet, or at least the programs that he's been involved in, the players that he's been involved in, whatever. We've seen pictures of Alabama guys throwing around cash. We saw pictures of Derrick Henry in front of a car, of this guy in front of a car, of whatever. Oh, by the way, Tennessee fans know this well. Jeremy Pruitt, of course, got fired. Money in McDonald's bags. Where did Jeremy Pruitt come from? Alabama. Where did most of his recruiting class staff come from? Alabama. I'm not accusing Nick Saban of anything, but I think Jimbo Fisher made it pretty clear that there are some skeletons in Nick Saban's closet, and if you dig deep enough, not even Nick Saban's closet, God's closet, according to Jimbo Fisher. And if you dig deep enough, you might find some stuff that you don't want to see. And so when I look at this is why I believe that it's an L for Nick Saban. Because I understand, and maybe I should even backtrack. I understand where Nick Saban's coming from. Nick Saban, this is a crazy evolving world of college football, and Nick Saban just wants some guidelines. He wants some oversight. He doesn't want Texas A&M to be able to do this. He doesn't want Georgia to be able to do this, Florida to be able to do that, Tennessee to be able to do that, and Alabama to be able to do this. Well, guess what? You know who wants the exact same thing? Jimbo Fisher. He said it in his press conference, which we'll talk about in Aaron Right, Aaron Wrong. He said it in his press conference. We need federal oversight. And so where I'm frustrated with Nick Saban is, again, after all this, Jimbo Fisher does his press conference. Nick Saban does an interview on Sirius XM where he comes out and he says, look, I wasn't trying to single anybody out. I'm worried about the future. I'm worried about collectives. Collectives are just paying players. That's not what the intent was. First of all, I agree. Second of all, Jimbo Fisher agrees. But third of all, there is a way, and by the way, Nick Saban said something out of pocket that he shouldn't have. It doesn't make him a terrible human being. He just said something dumb that he shouldn't have said at a time when cameras are on him. Guess what? I say dumb stuff all the time. Doesn't mean that I should be not, ridiculed or judged or criticized when I say dumb stuff. I say dumb stuff all the time. I get crushed for it. And that's okay. I deserve it. But in this particular case, Nick Saban deserves it too. Because it's not just what he said, but it's that he said stuff that criticized individual people, individual programs, individual players. And that was what Nick Saban said. He said, I shouldn't have individually named anybody. And that to me was, outside of Nick Saban being a hypocrite with the Bryce Young stuff, that was my other takeaway. If you are worried about the future of college football, and by the way, we all are. I am. I'm not here to say that I think the current system is the best system and what happens if this and da-da-da-da. But at the same time, there is a way to do it without going after individual schools and individual players and individual families. By the way, it wasn't just Texas A&M that he went after. He went after Jackson State and Travis Hunter. By the way, another program that there is no proof of at all. It's just internet rumor, right? Travis Hunter commits on signing day, flips from Florida State to Jackson State and Deion Sanders, and we start seeing all these crazy rumors, well, Deion works for Barstool, and Barstool gave him $1 million, and blah, 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 and this and that. Well, if Barstool's handed out $1 million to everybody, then why didn't they sign all the 5 stars? Why was it just one? Travis Hunter, by the way, coming out and saying on, I think it was Thursday morning or Wednesday night, saying, wait a second now, if I got $1 million, why does my mom still live in a 1-bedroom house with 5 children? I ain't seen that $1 million if I got it. And so that's where my frustration personally is with Nick Saban. I think he wants the same things that Jimbo Fisher wants. I think that he wants the same things that I want. He wants a college football where there is federal oversight, federal guidelines, all of that, so that everybody is on a fair and balanced playing field. By the way, I'll defend Nick Saban on this. Like all of the issues that Nick Saban comes out publicly to talk about, I don't believe that he's afraid of Jimbo Fisher or afraid of Texas A&M or afraid that his program is slipping. He just wants what's best for the sport, and he wants, if you want to call them fair rules, I don't know about fair, but he wants something across the board that evens the playing field. He doesn't want, in a hypothetical world, Texas A&M or Texas or USC or whomever to be able to have a $30 million budget for a recruiting class and a school like, I don't know, Alabama, Ole Miss, whoever, have less. And so I understand that he wants what's best for college football. I do not judge him for that at all. I also think there was a way to do everything that he did on Wednesday night without calling out Jimbo Fisher specifically, without calling out Jackson State specifically, without calling out Miami specifically, although that one's a little different because he did talk about Nigel Pack, which that number is public. There is a way to do that without going after families, players, and coaching staffs. There's a way to say, guys and girls, I love your support of Alabama. I'm worried about the future. We have rumors that schools are paying players upwards of $1 million and calling it NIL. We have rumors that some of our conference rivals aren't playing by the same set. There is a way to do it without calling out Jimbo Fisher specifically, without calling Texas A&M specifically, without calling out Jackson State specifically. And I can't help but think that Nick Saban took an L on Wednesday night. Does it make him a bad human being? Doesn't mean, by the way, that he doesn't want what's best for college football. But in this case, in this world, he went after individual players, individual coaches, individual families, individual schools. I thought he was dead wrong. I thought Jimbo Fisher had every right to defend himself. It made for great content, by the way. I can't sit here and lie and say it didn't make for great content.